It's nigh on the hour of 5. Morning, you're listening to JJJFM. Before we cross to the news, I think an idea of the weather is in order. The weather at the moment is a little overcast.
Move over Ben Hur. This rising star of modern chariot racing is out for just as much fame and fortune. Chris Gleeson, and that's a name to remember, hasn't got time to scratch himself these days because as a trainer, he's hot. At 21, he's arrived and on the way up. His stables are full. 18 owners, each paying $125 a week per horse in training fees for that golden touch that makes a winner.
So I was very lucky. The very first horse I got turned out and won 12 races, and he sort of got the ball rolling for me. And then the next horse I got, he won another 12 races for me. So I've sort of had luck right from the start, and it's really kicked me along, you know, because whenever you're winning races, people are noticing you, so there'll always be a horse there being offered to you or that.
At the Gleeson stables, bed and breakfast is not all that's on offer. If it's dawn, then it's sand work. In this yacht, Merc and Volvo suburb of Sydney's northern beaches, this ritual is now quite familiar. The first horses he got to train were often risked with someone so young because the horses had already broken down, that is, developed injuries on hard training tracks. The Gleeson rehabilitation scheme was soft sand and long swims.
Swimming is very good for the horse's legs. Down here we get a lot of bad-legged horses, just as far as they might have suspensory or tendon troubles. And when a horse has leg problems, there's a lot of heat in the leg, and the heat in the leg is what causes the pain.
Chris Gleeson's professionalism, success, style and looks are part of a new image that harness racing is very keen to push. A cleaner image, far removed from the backyarder with a nag or two on the side.
Harness racing will always be recognised as a sport for a hobby horseman. Just in presentation nights and that, there's always something mentioned about the hobby horseman in the sport, you know.
Why is that? I mean, what makes it good?
Well, I think just because you could say have a fellow who can just train and drive his own and race his own horse, you know.
Is it cheap?
Not really, no, it isn't, really. But any sport these days isn't cheap, is it?
He's had help on the way. His accountant father gives financial advice. His brothers and sisters help out in the stables. But even so, it is expensive to set up now, compared to the way trotters were trained in the early days.
It was a lot better track. And
Bill McHugh knew the game well from the 40s right through to the 60s.
This is in Harold Park, around about the 1941. There's a little horse called Repulse. I won a race with, beating odds-on favourite horse called Leawar, driven by Frank Culbert.
Is it a sport you'd encourage young people, your children, to go into?
Not unless they had a lot of money today. Costs a lot of money today to train horses and to race horses. So you feed, alone you're shoeing, where you was getting horses shot for, say, 10 bob. See, it's something like $20 or $30 today to shoe a horse, and your feed's the same. And you're on You got all these vitamins and things today that you didn't have in the old days.
For the ease of me as a trainer, I start off with a basic feed and then they sort of show you from there what way they like to go. They mightn't like some certain grains, or there might be a fat one that you have to, say, put on a bit of a diet, or there might be an undernourished one that you've got to give a bit more protein to.
So the horses, Ralph and Graham, witness a stable routine of care and feeding that turns them into winners befitting their racing names of Hurricane Fury and Full-On Aces.
I start my horses on a special race mixture to lead them up to the race. So then by the race, it's actually working right through their system and everything is functioning. Everything in their system is sort of at its best.
Does that mean that there isn't that much of an opening anymore for the backyard hobbyist?
No, I'd say no. You'd have to, you know, you've got to be a professional today to get any money out of it. I'd say that, honestly.
I like to have my horses racing about once a week. Occasionally they have two races in a week. Come on. The horse has to be 101% fit to go to the races, but in getting it fit, you've got to watch out that you're not actually jading it for a race. So that's when you've got to feed them well and give them good supplements to replace what you take out of them with the hard work that you give them.
The hard work builds up to this, showtime. Friday night at Sydney's Harold Park Paceway, the Trots. With the competing entertainments of video and television, there never will be another world record crowd like the 50,000 people who saw the 1960 Inter-Dominion. But still, the Trots manages to attract a remarkably diverse range of patrons, like it did in the days gone by.
Well, all sorts of people. A lot of businessmen like milkmen, bakers, butchers, all that sort of thing. They all had horses, and even on the committee. There was a baker, Booth was a baker, Alton Cusack, who was the president of Harold Park at one time, had hotels. Arthur Swadling was a timber merchant.
How did you get involved, Bill?
Well, as I say, I got involved. I had milk carts, and I was breaking in milk cart horses and bread cart horses, and happened to buy a couple of sort of trotters that wasn't good enough for Harold Park, but good enough to race around the shows, and just for a bit of a hobby, I started to drive them around the shows.
And did you end up making it to Harold Park?
Oh, yes, I drove winners at Harold Park.
Bang up, mate, all right?
Night trotting started in 1949. Made a lot of difference to the crowd, and that. It was pretty popular in them days, the night trotting. And we used to get a very good crowd considering, compared to the daytime where we'd only have a couple of thousand. Of course, we used to only run, in the old days, you'd only race once a fortnight at Harold Park and once a fortnight at Victoria Park.
Lucky one, thanks, mate.
Named Harold Park, after the Kentucky-bred sire, Child Harold, that fathered most of the early standard breds, this course has witnessed the thrill of the race since 1902.
driving fee for that one?
Yes, yeah, all right.
Right, it's $25.
25, right.
Go for tonight. Tonight's shop guide. Truck guide for tonight. Truck guide for tonight.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Harold Park, 8 event program, the first event. The Sunday to the City Stakes, down to number 15 here, ladies and gentlemen.
The ball was 90 to 40. He was burning.
The punters seem happier to bet on harness racing since it changed from trotting to pacing. Though still commonly called the trots, most races are for pacing horses. They wear leather hobbles around the knees to keep that pacing gait. That is, with both legs of one side going forward together and then both on the other side, like a piston. Trotters had no hobbles, so if they broke their diagonal gait, the horse would be disqualified and the punter's money done cold.
Advance of that horse. As they make the home turn, 200 to go, and the Rio Star, who's done it come all the way, takes up the running from Port Albert. They're being followed by Derrimunga getting clear, but the Rio Star shot to the lead now, and the Port Albert and Derrimunga takes the front running home. From double to TJ Robinson. The Rio Star wins by 3 metres on the line, Port Albert.
You've got horses in training now?
Yes, I have an interest in about 5 horses.
Why?
Because I like the sport, it's exciting and you can get close to the action.
What do you mean close to the action?
Well, close to their training methods, close to the action when they're racing.
You're physically close to them?
Physically close, yeah.
Because the stand's close to the track?
That's correct, yeah.
Why harness racing, though, rather than gallops?
Because it's a sport that, with a moderate amount of money, you can become an owner and be involved in. You don't have to have millions.
While the pricey thoroughbreds of the galloping world get all the glamour and headlines, the standard breds of the pacing world cost less to buy, have much longer racing careers, and so they can build up quite substantial prize money totals. Punters, though, are prone to make other comparisons.
You know, everybody thinks that sort of the trotting is rigged, whereas they say the galloping isn't. But the problem with trotting is you can see the whole race. The crowd can see the whole race, whereas gallops, they're way off in the distance, and they just race past you, and that's all you see them. They just sort of see them race past you like that. So they don't know if galloping's rigged or not. I'm not saying that trotting's rigged, but you can see that when a horse gets locked on the rails, you can see when it doesn't get off the rails, you know, if it gets locked in on the rails. And it's blocked for a run down the home straight. Well, the crowd can see that, whereas in the gallops, they can't see that.
Precautions against race fixing extend far beyond the close critical gaze of the punters. As foals, they get whistled each time they urinate, so that they get to associate those two things, whistling and urination, ready for that day when, as winners, they'll be swabbed and tested for doping to try and keep the game clean. Have you ever been asked to stop a race? I mean, does that sort of thing happen?
Yes, it does happen. You know, like wherever there's money and gambling involved, there's always a bit of crookedness. So it does happen, but I can honestly say that I've never held a horse or pulled a horse up or anything like that.
The reputation of the sport is in the hands of the stewards of the New South Wales Harness Racing Authority.
Blow your whistle and then call them up whilst you're on the ground, let the mobile move away from you, pull up to where you normally stay, where the mobile's normally stopped, and so you'll be with a barrier attendant.
Yeah, I think it's probably a good idea. It's worthwhile giving it a try anyway.
Well, you know, I don't know if you want to do it, say, for 2 or 3 races.
They do have quite a bit of power in ruling what you do, sort of thing, because their decision is final. They just can suspend you, disqualify you. All depends what you sort of, or what they find you guilty of.
And now we've got the matter of Mrs. Frost set down for 6:30.
First of all, the bookies put up their prices. A lot of the people here are just general public, and they wait for a move from someone who knows what they're doing. Once they realise that the money's going on a particular horse and they think that person knows what they're betting on, then they'll follow the money. Besides that, they'll usually just wait and wait.
Is it a hobby or is it a business for you?
Business.
Right. You'd bet quite a bit. That's how you'd make your money?
Most races, yeah.
So what would be the biggest bet you've ever put on?
Couldn't really say. I don't know.
Well, in a week, say your best week, what would be your best winnings? The most you've ever won in a week?
More than what I'd earn in a normal job.
Right, and I suppose a harder one, what's the most you've ever lost?
More than what I'd earn in a year.
Ticket 13s for 750.
So, what's it like as a sport?
I like it and I enjoy it. I enjoy it and I live reasonably off it, so I'm happy.
It'll make you a wealthy man?
With a bit of luck.
Hot item in 1. Phenomenal gold in 2. Over on the inside next was Man's Fortune. They're being followed by Shazada and Lang Lachlan on the outside. They're being followed by the Showers on the outside. Outside and Gamma Ray drops out last. They make the run into the straight and they have just over 2 to go.
I'd really like to take out a premiership or a trainer's premiership or a driver's premiership while I'm still a junior driver.
So who's the premier trainer at present that you've got to knock out of the top
well, last season Brian Hancock won it and he's sort of very high up there again. I actually finished 5th in the state last season, so I'm hoping for a bit better result this season.
You're on the top now. Is there any sense in which Chris is yapping at your heels yet?
Yeah, well, I hope he is. You know, it keeps me keener, it keeps him keener, and, you know, it's been great to me. We've had some great champions, like Kevin Newman won 8 premierships here, and Vic Frost, you know, I was sort of saying, well, I'll get there one day, and I was yapping at their heels, so I hope Chris and the younger Ray are yapping at my heels, because it's all the better for our sport, and if they're doing that, it's great.
Tracking Mr. Marathon along. Further back came my tricky fella further on the field. That was all right in front collect.
And 49, 81.
It's ironical that betting is the driving force behind harness racing today. In colonial times, United States religious groups in the eastern American states campaigned strongly against the evils of racing. In 1802, they closed the New England racetracks. Useless thoroughbreds were outlawed, but trotting, the courts ruled, was not racing, just useful cart horses going fast. Today, close to $100 million are waged each year on the results of trainers like Chris Gleeson. So how do you decide what trainer to put your horses with?
You look for a trainer that's sort of having a fair deal of success, that comes recommended from other people. Sometimes you're fortunate enough to find a young trainer that's on his way up and you get involved with him. And
so where have you got your horses?
With Chris Gleeson.
And what do you think of him as a trainer?
I think he's excellent. I really do. I think he's having tremendous success, so that speaks for itself.
He's young, though.
He's very young, but he started out young and he had a good trainer, Joe Wilsley. Showed him the ropes in the early stages. And
how far do you think Chris Gleeson could get?
He'll go right to the top, without a shadow of a doubt.
You mean that?
Very sincerely. He's up there now. He's up there in the top 5 or 6 now, and he's succeeded very well last year, and he's going even better this year.
Do you expect to make a bob out of the game?
No, definitely not. No, that's foolhardy to even consider making any money out of it. If you do, it's a bonus, but you go in there thinking it's a cost. It's an out-of-pocket cost. And when you do get this success, well, it's terrific. Well, if you had one horse, I suppose it would cost you in the vicinity of around about $4,000 a year. By the time you've spelled for part of that year, you'd be looking around about outgoings of about $4,000. Now, hopefully, if the horses can win you some prize money back, probably in excess of that, hopefully in excess of that, well, you're in front. But you don't look at it in that light.
Well, do you think your horses give you $4,000 worth of excitement in a year?
This one racing tonight, well, for sure.
The biggest problem is to get the drivers to come up to the barrier in a way that's not going to disadvantage their horses or disadvantage other drivers in the race. Getting them there and getting them there together so that you can have a nice smooth build-up of speed and dispatch to the field at a pace that is advantageous to the majority of the field. I think that's probably the biggest problem. Righto, mate, now we can go down. Righto, drivers, front line.
They're all facing up well behind the mobile. 1960 the journey.
Second line, follow them up. Come on, second line, follow them up.
Behind the leader still is Green 3 minutes, and here's the favourite trailing off now, Moonlight Gold. And David Aiken set going and charges up to them 3 deep, being tricked along by George's Pacer.
What sort of ride was that, Chris?
Pardon?
What sort of ride?
Not as good as what I would have liked, you know.
Why is that?
He didn't win, but he went quite good. It's very hard leading on a heavy track, you know. You're sort of cutting you're cutting the breeze plus dragging through the mud too, you know.
Because you were out in front for most of the race.
Yes, yeah. So on the rails is where most of the horses travel, you know. So when you're on the rails and leading, you're actually fighting the breeze, and it is quite a windy night tonight, so that you're cutting the breeze even more, and you're dragging through the mud too. So it's sort of.
So what will you earn for having come second?
Third, didn't it? Yeah, third.
Third.
Oh, I think it's about 500.
Close.
500.
So you'll get $500?
Yes, yeah.
And if you'd won?
About 3.5, I think, for first prize, but anything.
A bit of incentive?
Yes, yeah.
Next time.
You never know, do you?
Next week, A Big Country takes us to the red heart of Australia to meet a bush nurse whose challenging job is to provide health care for the people who inhabit the 50,000 square kilometres of desert north of Alice Springs. Stay in view now, though, for comedy in While You're Down There.